Hi, everyone. I'm Don Saucier. I'm the Faculty Associate Director of the Teaching and Learning Center, and you found our way to our professional development series. We meet over the entire academic year on Wednesdays at noon in real time over Zoom. We also record these events for asynchronous viewing. So if you're here today and saying, wow, my colleagues need to see this, and I think they should, you can point them to our webpage, and this will be posted a couple hours after our event today. So I'm so excited to see you. Um, you have the opportunity to earn a professional development certificate from the TLC if you attend some of our events and do post-event reflections and those sorts of things, write a little reflection at the end. We have those for both GTAs and for graduate and for faculty and staff members. And my colleague will drop the link for that in the chat, but you can also find it on our TLC webpage at your convenience. We also have a TLC hub, and you'll see that in just a second. And as part of my slides, we share some information across about events and things like that. Next week, next week it's going to be fall break. So all of you should take some time to yourselves next week. It's and recharge for the last push of that semester. But in 2 weeks, on December 3rd, Andy Lopez Kaler, who is an amazing instructor at K-State, actually a graduate student instructor at K-State, is going to be talking about making learning memorable through humor. Very excited. It's going to be a very fun event toward the end of the semester, so please be there. Today's talk, I'm excited, is about TEVALs because I'm giving it. So I'm very excited, and hopefully what we're going to do after today is have a little bit more understanding about what the value of TEVALs are and how you can make them better. So I'll talk about that throughout. I'm now going to share my screen, which is the most challenging part of any presentation over Zoom. And did that work the way I wanted it to? And Jeff says yes, so excellent. So what we have here, and by the way, throughout my talk, if you drop things into the chat, I can see the chat, and I will be very excited to talk through the questions, concerns, comments that you have. So you found your way to the series, you see this. So just in case you missed it, there's that. This is our hub. If you want to be added to our hub, number one, if you attend our events, we can do that. But if you're watching this asynchronously, if you scan that QR code, we'll give you an invitation to join that hub. Today, I'm going to be talking about getting better student evaluations of your teaching. Now, when I say better, I don't necessarily mean more positive. What I mean is you're going to get better data to better support your teaching moving forward, which is the purpose of having students evaluate our teaching, is we take that information and we can optimize our classes in future semesters. So we're going to talk about getting better information from the TEVALs. So my objectives today, this is kind of like TEVALs 101, providing a lot of this information from start to finish, all the way up through. We're going to discuss what TEVALs are and are not. We're going to discuss why and how we should use TEVALs. We're going to talk about how we should not use TEVALs, because sometimes, in my opinion, they are misused and misinterpreted. And we're going to discuss how to get the most out of our teaching evaluations, which I think is going to be very important. We also have some other resources. We're going to post these slides a little bit later. These are hyperlinks to a lot of other resources, video resources, the university handbook, etc. And these will kind of talk you through a number of things. I want to point you out to that Engage the Sage YouTube channel. This is a channel that I created with some of my students. And what we do is have a lot of teaching tips, recommendations, and those sorts of things. So there's a lot of video resources in there about recommendations for how to approach teaching evaluations in your classes. So I highly recommend you check those out too. So I want to know what we think about TEVALs. And we have a little bit of a small group, so I will pepper in among your responses some responses that I've classically gotten in some of these conversations. So I want you to think about one word you might use to describe TEVALs. And I'll give you just a minute. You can drop that in the chat, or you can unmute and say it out loud. We get intimidating as one of the things there. We've got stressful. Yeah, a lot of people, I think a lot of students don't really realize that moment of dread. And I actually talk about one of those videos, like that moment of dread when you're downloading that TEVAL report and you're checking it out. We used to actually get envelopes in our mailbox, and I remember getting an envelope, and I was walking to my office really quickly so I could open it and see what's in the envelope, and my department had caught me for a quick chat, and all I could think about is let me go, let me go, let me go. I want to go see this in private. I want to see what happened. It can be complicated. It can be disappointing. Some of the rest of you remember those envelopes too. I didn't see a lot of positive words that people kind of had here, and one of the things I want to talk about throughout the rest of this conversation is maybe there are some positives. But we started with negatives. And what we're seeing here is that there's an emotional kind of draw on this. We feel like maybe we're getting called out. And sometimes that might be an accurate reflection that we feel our students are calling us out for some of the things we did in the class. So the negatives are something that I think faculty and GTAs are pretty familiar with. That this possibility they're going to read mean things that they maybe don't agree with, and they're going to think that students can away with saying them anonymously without rebuke. But what's a positive thing about TVALs? Because we do them for a reason. What's a positive thing about TVALs? Someone said they're constructive. I like that. So what they're supposed to do is actually provide us with input, with data, with suggestions, as someone said, to refine our teaching. Right? This is what TVALs actually allows. It's data. And a lot of us are data scientists on this call right now. And as data scientists, we take that information and we move forward with that additional evidence. So what TVALs do is they collect that data for us so we can actually become better teachers. Someone said quiet students have shared things I didn't realize they experienced, including really great things. A lot of us do get a lot of positive comments in our TVALs, but as my cognitive psychology colleagues would tell us, we all suffer from a negative cognitive bias, which means you can have 200 comments saying this is the greatest class I've ever taken. You get one comment that says, I don't like Dawn, and that's the one that keeps you up at night. All right, so we kind of zero on those negatives. My evolutionary colleagues tell me it's because we're detecting threat, right? And it's more important to pay attention to threats than to compliments. So that's something that often takes away from some of those positives that we should be aware of. So what TVALs are, first of all, I'm going to level set a little bit. TVALs is an acronym for teaching evaluations. And what that means is we're going to have students evaluate our teaching. So in the literature and pedagogy, these are referred to as SETs, or student evaluations of teaching. So at the end of the semester, students are going to tell you what they think. Now, these are student perception data, and it's important we understand what that means. Student perception data mean this is what a student thought about your class at the time they completed the TEVAL. That's not necessarily their reflection 6 months later. It's not necessarily what they thought at the beginning of the class. It's probably going to be something that is influenced by the time that they're creating it. So most of us are doing TVALs, as we should, when? End of the semester. And at the end of the semester, it is chaos for everyone. It's chaos for the professors. It's chaos for the students. They're completing when they're under stress. And not only are they under stress, we might be the ones stressing them. So it's kind of important to understand, as someone had once told me, and I'm not saying this statement is completely true, but someone has once told me what TVALs are having people who aren't qualified to tell us at the exact worst time. Right? These are not people who are trained in teaching. These are people who are experiencing our classes at the time of highest stress. That might not be ideal, and it might actually change the value of some of the data that we get. So what TVALs are not, number one, they're not direct measures of teaching effectiveness or excellence. It doesn't really tell me how good you are as a teacher, because it's not a direct measuring of your teaching. It's not the only metric that can or should be used to evaluate teachers. And I've been in rooms where we have used the numbers on TVALs to evaluate colleagues more so than we should have. And this is something that should not take place. So what happens is these are not the only metric that can or should be used to evaluate teachers. And as you will see, this is not just my opinion. This is university policy. And TVALs are not objective or free of bias. So it is not someone kind of taking all the data and deciding what makes the most rational, logical choice. Sometimes those are a little bit more emotional, a little more situational driven than they could otherwise be. So why we do them at all, despite the fact that they're imperfect, it's a standardized form of anonymous student feedback in every course they take. I will take this opportunity to tell you, you don't have to use TVALs. You can use some other way of gathering these same data, but some form of standardized anonymous feedback from your students is going to be administered in the classes that they take, with really only one exception, which we'll get to in a second. So what this does, though, is it sometimes leads people to think that because it's standardized, because everyone is graded on the 1 to 5 scale, that you can compare from one class to another. You cannot. That would be an inappropriate use of TVALs, because there's lots of things that are different about those classes. Just because people completed the same form, we wouldn't have necessarily the same norms we would expect about those classes. So I'm going to share with you some university policy, and I'll have a lot on the slide, but I'll have highlighted in yellow the stuff that I really want us to pay attention to. And so this is from, if you're a handbook geek like me, this is from section 34, section 1, at least first. So student feedback and classroom instruction, reading the highlighted part, is an important source of information in the evaluation of teaching effectiveness. So students are allowed to do this. The university handbook mandates that they get to do this. And this data should be collected under controlled conditions that ensure students' anonymity. And that's going to be important. We got to make sure that the students are anonymous, is according to our university handbook. So having students sign TEVALs or those kind of things is going to be in direct conflict with the university handbook's policies. Also, we should collect student feedback for each course and section we teach. So this is something where we have to do TEVALs or something similar to that in every course that we teach. And for me, this is something I've seen progress a little bit over the decades, because when I was first hired, this was not necessarily the case. And what would happen is this was only true for assistant professors on the tenure track in my department, for instance. So what happened if you had tenure, you only had to do it in one of your classes a year. So if you taught 4 classes, you only had to do one. And really what people were doing is they were doing it all 4, but they're only submitting one. They were submitting their best one for merit evaluation and those kinds of things. So that didn't really seem fair. And students were like, well, that means that we don't get to provide feedback on all of our courses. So SGA and Faculty Senate and those bodies got together and said, yeah, it makes sense that we would have to do this in every class. So you got to do this in every class you teach, with the exception of individualized classes. So if I'm teaching a one-on-one reading class with Jeff Roberts, who is one of my graduate students, then it wouldn't really make sense for me to give Jeff a TEVAL because I can't keep that anonymous. So there might be other ways, and there are other university handbook sections on this that would get data from Jeff about their experience, but this is something that wouldn't necessarily be appropriate for TEVAL. So how we set them up, these are all done online. It used to be the case that we did these in hard copy. We'd pass them out in those envelopes. We'd get those envelopes in our mailbox when they were processed by the Teaching and Learning Center. We had the opportunity to do online TEVALs for a long, long time. But then when COVID came, we moved to all online TEVALs. Now, there's an issue with that. And the biggest issue with that is data loss. So if you're going to do these online, you often will find, especially if you're going to have your students do them at home on their own time, you don't maybe get the response rate you could have otherwise. And kind of early estimates where you get about half the data. Again, being a data scientist, like many of you, I'm not happy with half the data. And one of the things we'll kind of talk about is ways that we can get those data response rates up. But these are going to be finalized by you in Canvas. What you will do is if you go into Canvas, when you first go into your dashboard, in the upper left corner, it's going to say account. You're going to click account, and then you can click TEVAL, and then you can click create new TEVAL. You can also, by the way, go back and see all of your historical TEVALs in that same window. So you can go back and say, hey, what did I do in 2022 in that general psychology class? You can go back and find that. So these are going to be archived for you, which I think is really cool and convenient, but you can also create a new one. And this is what you will do. We also have a video tutorial, if you've never done this before, that'll walk you through. And I think this is Tucker Jones, one of the staff members historically in the TLC. He was awesome, and he was nice enough to create this video for us, and it still works. The system is still as similar as it was when he created that video a couple of years ago. So you can check that out. It'll walk you through. So when you're going to do this, though, it's going to be some information that you're going to want to have at the ready. First of all, you're going to have the date your TEVAL will be available. So what will happen is you're going to open your TEVAL and you're going to close your TEVAL. And your TEVAL is going to close no later than the day before the date. I'm sorry. It's going to be due no later than the last day that grades are due. So I believe this semester that's Monday, December something. It's the Monday right after finals week. I think that is the last day you're allowed to have your TEVALs be submitted, because all TEVALs need to be submitted before grades are due. When grades are then due the next morning, you can go into Canvas and download your TEVAL reports. But this is set up so that our grades are finalized before we're reading our student comments. Now, this should be administered at or near the end of your course. Now, I say this because technically, you could have done your TEVALs already. Technically, you've done your TEVALs a long time ago. But this should be done at or near the end of your course. And in reality, when should that be? And looking in the comments, someone liked the tutorial video. I'm really glad to hear that. And someone else said it was Friday the 19th. It may have been Friday the 19th, and I'm getting a direct message. Let's see. It is Friday the 19th, so I am corrected. But thankfully, I have amazing people at my back and supporting me. So the create dates, they're open. And the reports are going to be made available. Oh, actually,
On
Christmas
Christmas this year.
Christmas morning. All right, so we'll get
So
those.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
I will say for anyone who celebrates Christmas, I would recommend you do not check your TVALs on Christmas. You know, that's not the present I want to open on Christmas morning. I'm do something more related to my family. If you don't celebrate Christmas, you know, have at it if you want. But I don't have the best work-family balance, but I think checking TVALs on Christmas morning for me would violate some of those balances that I try to keep. So yeah, these are going to be due no later than December 19th, and you can create it no later than December 14th. So you can't do it the morning of the 19th and have it done. You have to create it before the 14th and have it then end by the 19th. So thank you, colleagues, for sharing that information with me. You also want to think about your dates for reminder emails. So you're going to have the opportunity to set up some reminders if you would like. And typically what will happen is I'll do these in the last week or two of my semester. So I'll have a couple of periodic reminders throughout that allows my students to do that. And one of the things I will tell them is that when they do the TVALs, they don't get the reminders anymore. So if they want to stop getting that in their inbox, they could do the TVALs and that will stop. So you want to have those ideas for when you want those reminder dates. And you will want to have some text for your first electronic invitation message. A lot of students complain to me that the TVAL message that they get that says, hey, can you do the TVALs for Psych 110 for Dr. Saucier, looks like spam. And it kind of does. And it's this auto-generated message. It's not personalized in any way. So I like to have text for an electronic message ready. And I'll share that text for you here a little bit later. This then makes it a little bit more personalized. It's still not a beautifully formatted message when they get it, but it's a little easier for them to understand what that message is. And when they click that link, it's a little clearer to them what class they're completing the TVAL for. Because when doing them online, it probably stands to reason that it is possible that you could get confused about what class you're completing that TVAL for, especially if you know that class meets Tuesdays, at 1:05, and you're not necessarily thinking about the course number every day, which is kind of the indicator for them of what that TVAL is being completed for. You'll also want to have text for the reminder messages about what you want that to be. Typically, that's going to be for me, and you'll see, like I said, some examples of this a little bit. It's going to be a streamlined version of that first message that provides some of that information that I would like them to have. You will also want to have text for any items you will add to your TVAL, and this is going to be something I'm going to stress in our conversation today. The TVAL itself is okay. The default questions are okay. There's a set number of default questions that all of us are going to ask, and then there is one text box that says additional comments. If you only use the default version of the TVALs, you're not going to get great TVALs in terms of your ability to collect the data that you want to help you refine your teaching. So we're going to talk about what I'm going to recommend that you do to tailor your TVALs to your class, and you're going to think about that before you go in to create your TVAL. You can have rating scale items, so ones that they would rate on that 1 to 5 scale. You can also have free response boxes where they can put in text for their answers. You also have to put in instructions for completion. So something like, please answer the following questions honestly. And I will say for the free response ones, you have to put in the instruction for completion, even though you're putting in the question 2, which for many of us is also the instructions for completion. So that's something it took me a minute to kind of figure out. Okay, I have to put, please answer the question honestly, and then I'd have to put the question, and I'd have to put that instruction every single time. It's an issue with the system. It's not something I created or can change, but just be aware that you're going to have instructions for completion you'll have to put in. You'll also want to have comments for the FIF, which is the Faculty Information Form. This provides some information about the demographics of your class, how often you teach it, however your teaching load is, and those kinds of things are. But there's also opportunity in a text box to provide comments. And I recommend that you do this as necessary. For instance, you could say that I taught this high flex. You could say that I taught this in a different way than I have before. You can say that I had some honor and integrity issues in this class that I expect might affect some of the comments my TEVALs. So you can put some context in here so that when you or someone else is looking at these TEVAL later for the purpose of tenure, promotion, merit evaluation, application for a job, there's a little bit of context for what those comments are. So this is something I would recommend you think about whether or not you want to put some information in there. So for instance, during COVID, I would put, I taught this class in a remote teaching method, remote teaching modality because of the emergency of the COVID-19 pandemic. And what would happen is I put in there, and I've never done that before. So that would provide that if those TEVALs maybe looked a little bit different than other semesters that I have taught, there's some reason that might go into that interpretation. And by the way, if anyone has any questions at any point, please feel free to chime in or drop them in the chat. I'll monitor the chat as we talk. So how we should use TEVALs. They're a formative, not a summative assessment. A formative assessment means it's going to be something that's going to help us get better. So what we're trying to do with a formative assessment is I'm taking data so that I will refine, I'll then collect new data, I'll further refine. So there's a process that we're working horizontally to be excellent teachers and to teach the best classes that we can teach. So this is a formative assessment. It's not a summative assessment. It's not in essence how good a teacher you are or how good you will be. That's not what they are. These are data collection at that one point in time to provide information for you to be able to teach better. And information for you to maybe continue to teach as good as you've been teaching, right? Depending on what that data are going to convey to you. These provide amazing, interesting data. Not all the data is fun to read, but all the data are data. And we should acknowledge that there are biases in TEVALs. One of the most kind of famous ways that biases come out are in instructor demographics. There are in the literature, if you read, you're going to find that there are biases in TEVALs related to the demographics of the instructor. So gender, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, nation of origin, those kind of things. That demonstrates in the literature that if students are sexist, let's say, this is an opportunity for them to demonstrate that. So we do have to be aware that there is the potential for those biases to emerge in this instrument. We also need to be aware that there's a possibility for biases related to the course demographics. So for instance, it might be the case that you're teaching a very large low-level course that students have to take versus a seminar at the kind of upper stages where only majors are taking. You might find that there are differences in how interested the students are to take that class. And what the TEVAL actually does is it tries to take some of that into account with some of the adjustment that they do. When you get your TEVAL scores, you'll get a raw score, which is just the average of all the students' responses. You'll also get an adjusted score, and the adjusted score adjusts for things like the students' prior interest in the class so that it doesn't penalize instructors for things that are outside their control. And I see that Rick Zajac just joined our call here a little bit ago. And Rick did a wonderful talk on this a couple of years ago that we have archived on our webpage that talked about all of that adjustment. So you can definitely check that out. And he goes into lots and lots of detail about how that adjusted number works. I personally think of those two numbers, I'm going to interpret the higher of the numbers because I think that that's kind of important. It shows me, if that adjustment is favoring the instructor, it probably means there's some factors outside their control disadvantaging them. But also if that instructor did really, really well with the mean, if that adjustment takes them down, I really don't feel good about taking that down. So I will typically interpret when I'm evaluating faculty, for instance, the higher of those two numbers. How we should not use TEVALs is they should not be the only or even the most important metric used in evaluating instructors. They're not going away. People are going to continue to use them, but these should not be the only thing or even the most important thing. And when I'm talking about evaluating instructors, I'm talking about lots of ways: promotion, tenure, merit evaluation, reappointment, hiring, all of those things. Now, these are some other videos that you can kind of hit that tell you other ways to demonstrate your teaching excellence beyond TEVALs. So if you see, we have those two videos, the Demonstrating Your Teaching Excellence Part 1 and Part 2. In those two videos, I talk about 10 ways to demonstrate your teaching excellence if you were going to apply for a job, go for a teaching award, whatever. And only one of those 10 are the student evaluations of your teaching. There are 9 other ways that you can do it, and that's not a comprehensive list even, but there are 9 other things that I recommend that you think about when you're deciding whether or not TEVALs are the whole story. So again, using TEVALs is the only metric. I'm saying we can't do it. Again, that's not just my opinion. That's university policy. So again, university handbook weighing on this. It doesn't get much clearer than this highlighted yellow statement right here that student feedback should never be the only source of information about classroom teaching. Again, as I mentioned, I've sat in a room where sometimes the TEVAL is the only one discussed. That's not appropriate. Departments and units should be encouraged to develop a comprehensive, flexible approach to teaching evaluation where, highlighted in yellow, several types of evidence can be collected, presented, and evaluated as a portfolio. And by the way, that Oxford comma missing, that's not me, that's the university handbook. Other things that they recommend, and this is again not a comprehensive list, include things like peer evaluation, which I think is much more informative in some ways about informing teaching practice than TEVALs might be. Course materials, special contributions, innovative teaching materials, special teaching activities outside the university, etc. One additional thing that I would put on this list that I don't see in the university handbook, but I think is probably the gold standard in evaluating teaching, would be demonstrations of student work. If you're able to demonstrate that your students are learning amazing things and that they can apply it in super cool, amazing, personalized ways, that for me would be the gold standard that that class was valuable. So I would add to this that demonstrations of student work, you got to anonymize them, take the names off, those kind of things. But that would be another way to demonstrate to potentially an evaluating body that you did really cool things in that class. Also, faculty members are free to submit supplemental student views from other instruments or other methods of their own choice. I have other surveys that I use in my class. Previously, one of my colleagues, Brandon Savage, talked about doing some of those things in his class as well. And I know a lot of you do kind of end of semester surveys or various kind of things. This is something I would recommend that if you do, put those in as well. Now, if you do this as a part of an assignment in your class, they might not be anonymous, they might be more confidential or something like that. So it might not be exactly the same kind of data, but this would be something that is going to show a pattern of student experience in your class, which I am very supportive of. Now, brief side comment, TEVALs are not the only way to get student feedback. Consider using some of these other formal and informal ways. Course reflections, top things learned. These are things that I like to do in my classes. And also, I don't like to do them only at the end. I like to do them at the midpoint too. Doing a mid-semester evaluation, I think, is a really important way for us to get some information about how that course is going at the midpoint. And often what will happen if a student tells me, hey, I wish we weren't doing this, or I wish we were doing more of that. It gives me the opportunity to, number one, consider making that change. But number two, if I'm not going to make that change, it gives me the opportunity to show my students that I'm listening, but also to provide context for the decisions that I have made. So for instance, if at the mid-semester point they say, hey, we don't do the final project, well, it's important for me to tell them what the value of the final project is and tell them it's not just to be mean, it's to demonstrate your learning toward all these SLOs that we have in the class, is so that you can actually demonstrate that you learned the things that you paid for this class to learn. So those mid-semester evaluations often provide us a little bit of an opportunity to kind of course correct and provide context for our students so the rest of the class goes well. So how we get the most out of TEVALs, because I think we want to be intentional about this, is we're going to announce and explain the value of TEVALs to our students. We're going to tell them what they are, we're going to tell them why we're doing them, and we're going to tell them that it's important. And we're going to personalize that message to our students. So I talked about kind of changing those TEVAL formatted messages. I also do Canvas announcements to let my students know this too. I also do it in person in my class. So make it very, very clear when the TEVAL is coming, make it very, very clear why it's important, make it very clear I want their honest experiences so I can improve the value of my class. So do it in person and or by video announcements. For instance, you can record yourself doing little videos. You don't have to if you're not comfortable on video. You don't have to do it that way, but that's something else that I'll often do in my classes. If you don't want to show one of your own, SGA has one. Our Student Governing Association a number of years ago made a video. It's linked right here. And in that video, they have students telling other students the value of TEVALs. And one of the things I tell all of my students, like my class, any other class, if you provide constructive professional comments, it is much more likely to create a change. So rather than saying, I hate Don, he sucks, you say, I wish Dr. Saucier gave us more time to do the final exam. That's a more constructive comment that allows me to think about, oh, that's the problem they had. Can I do something about that? So teaching your students how to complete these productively so their information is heard is going to be important. Because I do think most students, even when they put a negative comment, I don't think they're really just motivated to attack us emotionally. I think they're motivated to have our class do something different. If we tell them that and say, well, tell me what to do. If you raise a problem, give me a solution, right? Give me a suggestion, give me a revision or a recommendation. That's going to help me make this class be what you had hoped it would be. And what you're doing, and I tell my students is, you're helping me, you're collaborating with me to shape my future
Carolyn, I
classes.
already have Will. Um,
Okay. Sorry, I wasn't sure if that was a question. I think someone just unmuted accidentally. So if we're kind of letting our students know, hey, I want you to help me. I want you to help me make this class as good as it can be. I value your input and I value your experience. I think that most students are going to be up to that challenge and help us make our classes better with the recommendations they give us. So this is just a sample message that I send to my students in my Psych 110 class. Again, these slides are going to be available after our lesson today. If you want to use this exactly, be my guest. That's not copyright, any of those kind of things. If you like it, use it. You want to adapt it, that's fine too. So hi, everyone. This is your invitation to complete the student evaluations, TEVAL, for Psych 110 this semester. I loved learning with you this semester, and I really appreciate hearing your feedback about the course. I take these very seriously. I want to know what worked and what didn't. I want to know what I should keep doing and what I should stop or change. I want to hear about your experiences in Psych 110. I'm trying to let them know I really do want your information. I really do want your data. And please click on the link, complete the TEVAL. I hope all is well done. And what will happen is I'll tell them this is coming. So I'll say tomorrow morning when you wake up and you open your email, it's going to be here. And then this is what they're going to read. If we want to get the most out of this, because I said the biggest issue we have on online TEVALs is poor response rates, give them time in class for completion. Let them know Tuesday, December 3rd, or whenever, that I'm going to give you time at the beginning of class so that you can complete your TEVAL. So bring a device. Super important that we get your feedback. I want to do that. Now, give them that time, step out, come back when they're done. And I recommend doing it at the beginning of class, not the end, because I find if you do it at the end, they might just leave. But if you do it at the beginning of the class and then you're going to have your teaching after that, I found that students are more likely to stay, and I found my response rates are greater. Now, it's not only the students in class who will have the opportunity to do that. So a student who's not in class will also have opportunity via that link they received over email to do the TEVALs. So you're not gatekeeping the TEVALs away from students who aren't in class, but providing that class time removes that barrier of them forgetting or not having time in the rest of their busy schedules. So let them know it's coming. One of the recommendations, best practices in the field, is not to give incentives or extra credit. This could be seen as kind of a reciprocity agreement. Hey, you do the TEVALs and I'm going to hook you up. That could be seen as you trying to get those TEVALs to be a little bit more positive. And that's not really kosher. It might also be the case that in order to give those incentives or extra credit, you have to know the student did the TEVAL. And that might not be okay because now you know that, say, just responses are among all of those. And that might reduce that student's anonymity a little bit. So this is something I'm not comfortable with, and it's something that the best practices in the field about student evaluations of teaching are not comfortable with either. Some people say, well, how about I do it for 80%? If the class reaches 80% of that TEVAL response rate, because you can actually track that in your account. You can see the number of students that have done that. You can see the percentages. So if the class gets 80%, then everyone gets credit. I myself have a little bit of an ethical issue there because my grade is now dependent on someone else's work. So if you're okay with that, that's fine. I myself am not okay with it. Also, big thing, as I mentioned, the TEVALs pretty bare by default, but there's lots of ways that we can make these better by using supplemental items. These provide some organization for your students' responses. They provide some guidance for what we're trying to get. And now I'm targeting data collection. Data scientists like us, we tend to be pretty precise in our measurement and operational definitions in our research. I think we should do the same in our teaching evaluations. So these are going to provide opportunities for constructive feedback. If you're going to go small, if you want to do kind of a streamlined orientation, this is something I recommend. You can ask your students for things they like. So report things you like. You could say the 3 things you like, the 1 thing you like, or you just leave it general, like what are the things you liked. Then, and again, back to Tucker Jones, one of my favorite people, used to be in the TLC. He made the wonderful thing of not just asking what don't you like, he broke it into 2 items. Things that you didn't like that the instructor can't change. So sometimes it'll be like, the seats in here suck. You say, well, how am I going to fix the seats? If they put it here, they're saying, yeah, I'm just venting. Don't worry about it. The time of day, I'm just venting. Don't worry about that one. So this is basically saying they acknowledge that this was a negative thing, but they're also letting you off the hook for changing it. Now, it might be the case some of those things are things you can change. Maybe if the room isn't very good, you can find a better room. Maybe if the chairs aren't very good, maybe there's a room with better chairs. But this is something you can kind of say, okay, my students didn't attribute that to me. Now, the other, they did attribute to you. So these are things they didn't like that you can change. And what I like about this is if it's phrased correctly, you're now getting an actual recommendation to constructive feedback that you consider. This is data. You still get to make decisions. You can also assess their progress towards student learning outcomes from their perception. One of the things you can do, you can take those SLOs right off your syllabus and say, how much did you accomplish this SLO? Now, the only kind of disadvantage to doing this is it's indirect. So it's their perceived, their self-efficacy toward the SLO, not their actual efficacy. So it's how much they think they did it, not how much they actually did it. The other issue here is if you give these too early, they might be answering about things you haven't finished yet. So if you have something in the last semester of the class, but it's open the semester before the last week of the class, but it's open the prior week, you might be asking them how will they learn something you haven't taught yet. So you do have to be careful with the timing if you're going to do some of these. You can also ask perceptions of specific assignments and assessments. So did you think the exams were fair? Did you like the missions? Do you think the course reflections report allowed you to express your thoughts coherently, or whatever that happens to be? So now you can get data collection about specific things that we want. And you can ask about specific teaching practices. Did you like the lecture style of the class? Did you like the think, pair, shares? Did you like the case study days? These are things you can actually get data about your teaching. For instance, in my classes, I've talked a lot about peace. I'll define it one more time. I think peace is the foundation for excellence in teaching. It's preparation, expertise, authenticity, caring, and engagement. I'm going to ask my students, was Don prepared? Did Don demonstrate expertise? Was Don authentic? Did Don care? Was Don engaged? Because it's important to me that I bring those to my class. If I find that they're saying, hey, that preparation was a little lower this semester, that's something I want to work on moving forward. It's also important to me that I'm teaching inclusively. So I'm asked, did I make all students feel welcome? Did I make all students feel valued? Did I appreciate different perspectives and different opinions? These are going to be things that are important to me, so I'm going to ask my students about them. And if there's more than one instructor, if you're co-teaching and or you have a GTA, you can add in individual questions for each of you. If you have a co-teaching experience or you have a GTA, you only get one score for instructor effectiveness. If you can break this up, though, you then get a score for each of you later. Now, I'm not going to read through all of these, but these are supplemental rating scale ones that I've used in my class. So things like, I thought the lectures were engaging, or the course expectations were reasonable, the instructor encouraged my participation. You can steal these if you like, or you can create your own. So I have my students rate these on that same 1 to 5 scale that they rate the other default items of the TEVAL on. These are others. So the instructor supported my learning. Overall, I had a positive experience. The teaching assistant was effective. These are questions that you can steal if you would like, but you can also then craft your own. These are some free response ones. So what did you like? What did you not like? What would you change? What's your most valuable thing? What's your favorite memory? I like the last one too. Please describe your course in a 6-word essay. I love 6-word essays. I know my colleague Lisa Rubin loves them as well. I don't know if she's on the call today. But these are ways that I can kind of see what stuck out to my students. And I will say, these are really validating and fulfilling to read. When your students are telling you, these were the most important parts. These were my favorite memories. These are the things that stuck out to me. I've often found that some of the patterns in there were tangential conversations. So the things I hadn't planned to talk about, but after a student asked a question, I went up on the whiteboard and talked about it. Oftentimes those show up in the TEVALs as a highlight, and then the next semester, it's a dedicated portion of the course. So it's really good to kind of collect some of those really, from their perspective, big moments from your class. Now, use these TEVALs to inform your decisions. Use the TEVALs to inspire tweaks. If the TEVALs don't go as well as you would like, I wouldn't necessarily recommend throwing it all out and starting from scratch the next time you teach the course. I don't think that's good experimental design. And again, data scientists here, right? If we find a study didn't work, we often will change the manipulations. We'll often change the operational definitions of a dependent measure. We often tweak one thing and try again. This is what I would recommend. If you find that the format of your exams is creating some angst for your students, it doesn't mean you have to throw out exams and do something completely different. Maybe you tweak the format, and then you collect additional data at the end of that next semester. And do not chase your TEVALs. And by this, I mean, don't do things in your class purely to get more positive TEVALs. I firmly believe that if you're teaching, using peace, being as excellent as you can, then all the other measures of teacher effectiveness, teacher excellence, they're going to work out. But I also mean, don't overcorrect based on a single negative comment. What sometimes happens due to this negative cognitive bias we talked about, you might find one student out of 50 says, I want you to do this one thing differently. And you say, oh, that student said that, so you change it. But the other 49 students who didn't mention that were fine with things as is. And now you're finding that other students are having problems in future semesters. And as Andy had noted, sometimes you get contradictory comments. Andy, your hand is up.
Yeah, I've also I found this specifically in one of my classes. I had students complete the TEVAL one of the last day. I never have them do it the exact last day of class. It was one of the last days. And then on the last day of class, I had a discussion about the things we learned. We reviewed the objectives of the course and what helped, what didn't help get them towards those objectives. And one of my students in class said, oh, I really didn't like the format of the preparation guides that we had for every class. And all of the other students in class would, oh no, we loved them. And I thought just that if I had seen that in my TEVALs, I would have thought, oh, I should really change how I do that. Whereas seeing all my other students react very quickly and going, no, 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 we love them, made me go, oh, okay. Like maybe I could find some ways to offer a little bit more flexibility, but I'm not going to reimagine the way that I do this because clearly it's working for a lot of students. And so I would also recommend having conversations with students and as Don was saying, having other ways of being able to track their perceptions of your course beyond just the TEVAL can be really helpful.
Yeah, I love those comments. One of the things I did last semester, I was teaching a course for the first time. So my last day of class, I turned into a focus group. I said, hey, I've taught this class for the first time. Couple things I want to know. Should I teach it a second time? If so, what should I do differently? We had a real nice open conversation. And I didn't feel like they felt the need to be they were giving me feedback of both these are the things you should do differently, as well as these are the things that we liked. So let them know you're receptive to that. They really took that seriously. I think they really enjoyed being part of that collaboration moving forward with the class. So again, back to the data scientist world, right? You submit a paper, you get 3 reviews. Oftentimes those reviewers don't agree. Well, now you get 50, 100, 200 reviews, kind of on that. So don't chase those idiosyncratic comments. Look for the patterns of data and make the comments that are going to work for you in your class. If the change is not going to be something consistent with your course goals or your teaching style, you're not obligated to make that change. Yes, Rick.
So you mentioned doing TEVALs mid-semester, and I'm curious, how can that be useful if you don't get the results back till after the semester is over?
So I mentioned doing mid-semester evaluations. I did not mention doing TEVALs mid-semester.
Oh.
So what I will do is I'll do an informal evaluation that I create usually in Qualtrics, but it is not TEVAL. So no, I absolutely recommend you do not do TEVALs mid-semester. Save that for the end. Do something informal at the middle.
Got it.
So I apologize if I misstated that. So in summary, TEVALs and other measures of students' evaluations of teaching, they have biases and limitations that cannot be ignored, right? These are not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. They should not be used alone in evaluating teachers. Due to those imperfections and due to the ways that we have other direct measures of teaching, these should be used in concert with these other things. And they can be administered, though, in ways that increase the response rate and the utility of the data. Because really what we're doing to get better TEVALs, I said, I titled this talk, Getting Better TEVALs. I really mean getting more productive data, better data to help us inform our teaching. And this provides students that opportunity to inform our teaching. So that in conclusion, I want you to use these recommendations to get better TEVALs, again, meaning better information to help make your classes better as formative feedback from semester to semester. And at this point, I'm going to stop my share. We'll go back to the Brady Bunch gallery review so we can talk a little bit more. But I'll remind you that this presentation will be available on our website later. If you want to email me directly, I'd be happy to send it to you. But I absolutely appreciate the time and energy that you put into today's session. So what questions or comments or venting or anything that we want about TEVALs right now? How many of you set your TEVALs up so far this semester? All right, a couple of you are raising your hands. I'll remind you because I'm now looking at those correct dates. Make sure we have these here too. You can set your TEVALs up now. It's been open for a really long time, but you have to create them before the end of the day on December 14th. And they will close on December 19th. And you will have them available for you on December 25th, which for many of us is also Christmas morning. I will reiterate my recommendation that if you celebrate Christmas and have any semblance of work-family balance, you do not open your TEVALs on Christmas morning. As people are being quiet, I'll tell you the TEVAL comment that has stuck with me all the years. It was kind of negative. I was a graduate student teaching an undergraduate research methods course way back, University of Vermont, around 2000. And the comment was, and I apologize for the profanity, but I'm quoting here. It said, "Donnie Boy is a cocky prick." And it was funny because I told people that, and they were like, "Oh, did that make you mad?" And I was like, "The Donnie Boy part made me mad. That was kind of disrespectful, but cocky prick I kind of get sometimes. That makes a little sense to me." So it's one of those things that made me think, well, maybe it's hard to learn from someone who seems like they're, being arrogant or superior in their class. So it's helped me kind of modify that persona. So that's one of those comments. Every now and then I'm in class, be like, "Oh, wait, dial it back." Even though you have strong feelings about that theory, dial that back just a little bit.
I'm just going to throw out a comment.
Yeah.
One of the things that has helped me is when you do reappointments or promotions and you get to see other people's TEVALs, and you get to see that they too have that good and bad and ugly. And it's after a while, you just get used to it that this is just normal.
Yeah.
I feel bad for the beginning instructors who don't have that exposure to see what everybody else is like.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really important point. And one of the things I'll recommend for anyone watching this who's kind of new in their teaching career, when you have that happen, find a colleague, right? Say, "Hey, we sit down for coffee," something like that, and they'll share with you their Donnie Boy's a cocky prick stories, right? They'll share with you the negative comments that they've gotten about their TEVALs because we've all had that experience. No matter how wonderful a teacher you are, no matter how well you did that semester, there's going to be someone who didn't appreciate that and let you know. So just be aware of that. I do think that the incident goes down, kind of getting those just kind of nasty comments, if you structure those other free response questions toward more targeted goals. But if you just put additional comments, they say anything they want, and they'll still have that opportunity. But if you've given that very directed questions about teaching practices and assignments and assessments, I find that they've often said what they need to say before they take that negative shot.
I think it's also really helpful. I do what you do, Don, and a lot of times in my classes, I teach students how to give good feedback to each other. And so I'll tell them that in their TEVALs, I want to see those skills that we've developed in class in their TEVALs evaluating me. But also I let them know about what the purpose of TEVALs are, how they're used in my department, so how I'm evaluated. And so that students, because a lot of times I think students don't really realize like who sees this information, how is it used. And so I think that giving them that insight, I know that when I was a student I had no idea. It was just like, okay, you want to know. And a lot of times, yeah, if you're having a bad day and you didn't really enjoy the professor's class, you just let it rip and you're like, "Rrr." But realizing like, oh, okay, the department head is going to see this. Oh, these are going to be shared with other people. This is how my professor is evaluated in part on their teaching. I think it makes them take it a little bit more seriously, and you avoid some of those, or are more likely to avoid some of those more vulgar comments. They're like, "Oh, somebody else is gonna see. Maybe I should keep it a little more PG." Yeah.
You know, the first time I ever took TEVALs, or we didn't call them TEVALs in college, but whatever we called them, I was in an honors calculus class, and that class did not go well. So they passed out all the stuff, and we're sitting there, and the dude next to me just asked the class, "How do you spell zombie?" And we're all like, "Oh, this is not good." So any other questions or comments? All right, well, we're going to put a post-event survey available for you. We'd love you to complete that. That provides for us feedback about our events moving forward. I'll also remind you, wonderful event next week. Andy Lopez-Kaler talking about making learning memorable through humor next school week, not next fall break week, but 2 weeks. Andy is amazing. Won all the teaching awards as a GTA. Super excited that she's going to be part of our series. And we're excited to her to talk about humor. Should be a fun day. I would like you to thank all of you for taking the time during a very chaotic semester to make time for our professional development series today. And I wish you a wonderful afternoon.